This is Healthcare Now Radio's Talking the Walk. Come along with us as host Tom Testa and his guests discuss the strides being made toward actionable changes in the industry. It's a fast-paced 30 minutes, so keep up. And now, here's Tom Testa.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking the Walk. I'm your host, Tom Testa. On today's show, I'm going to be continuing my look at the organizations and associations who help shape and guide the stakeholders of the health IT ecosystem. I'm excited today to be joined by Robert Tennant. Robert is the Executive Director of WEDI, where he focuses on federal legislative and regulatory health information technology issues. Robert, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for the invitation, Tom.
Of course. Great to have you here, Robert. Let's start with an introduction to our audience about you. Talk to us about yourself and your journey to what led you to your current role today with WEDI.
Sure. Yeah. Like a lot of folks in healthcare, it was not a straight line by any stretch of the imagination. I actually came down from the land of the single payer, Canada, and went to grad school at the University of Maryland, and had really no knowledge or frankly any interest in U.S. healthcare. I was very much focused on campaigns and the parties, very interested in that. And when I finished grad school, by chance, I met somebody whose wife was the head of an association in DC. And so we got chatting and she offered me a job. And I remember the first week I was there was the Medical Group Management Association representing physician practices. We had a staff meeting and my boss said, "There's this little rule called HIPAA. I don't think it's going anywhere. Who wants to take it on?" And nobody raised their hand. So she said, "New guy, it's yours." And it turned out to be a career. So who knew? So yeah, I worked, and the other thing was MGMA was one of the original groups that started WEDI. And so we had a board seat. And so my first week on the job, my first week in U.S. healthcare, I was assigned to sit on the WEDI board of directors. So it was the proverbial drinking from the fire hose, learning about not just about health IT, but about U.S. healthcare in general. So it was a fascinating journey. I did a lot of listening at first, and then I became more confident and then started to chair various committees. And then the former CEO, Charles Stellar, and I talked, and he said, "We need to bring somebody on who can really do a deep dive into federal regulatory policy." So I made the switch, and my boss retired last year, and the board asked me if I would take the role. So it's been quite a journey, real thrilling ride, and I've just really enjoyed the people I've met and the success we've had.
Well, that's great, Robert. I didn't know that about the MGMA WEDI tie there. Yep. I didn't know that. That's interesting. That's a fun fact. Robert, we're going to get a lot of it into WEDI, but let's talk a little bit about your role with the organization.
So I came on as a vice president of federal policy, but WEDI is a small organization. So whether I was vice president or now executive director, we do a lot of things as a small team. So I help on the marketing side, I help on the policy side, I help on the work group side. So we're a small, but I would say very dedicated and focused group here at the staff level. And part of my job is to sort of be the cheerleader, not just for WEDI, but frankly for health IT. I think there's always two camps in healthcare, the ones that say, "Don't give us more regulation. We're swamped now." And then we've got the other camp saying, "Oh, we need to change. We need to adopt new technologies." So we've got to find that middle ground. And as we'll talk about later, WEDI is really that sort of middle ground in health IT. We represent a lot of folks, and we try to bring folks together to solve problems. And so that's really my major role at WEDI.
That's great. Robert, let's actually get into that then. Let's talk about the organization. I know that you are WEDI's an advisor to HHS. There's a lot of things you do. We're going to get deep into the work groups and all the great resources you offer. Talk to us a little bit about the history of WEDI. You've been along. You didn't come together last year, so you've been along some time
Yep.
here. Talk about the organization, your history, your mission, etc. Tell us about that.
It's a very interesting journey. A lot of folks in healthcare have heard of HIPAA, but
Mhm.
very few know where it came from. And it actually came from WEDI. Back in the early 90s, the first Bush administration, President Bush tapped a practicing physician as secretary of HHS, Dr. Lewis Sullivan, coming out of Atlanta. And he knew firsthand some of the challenges that providers and payers face simply in trying to exchange health data. And so he literally called into his office some of the leaders in healthcare and created what he called the Working Group for Electronic Data Interchange and called on them to write a report which would lay the framework for an improvement in how US healthcare exchanged data. So that led to the first report in 1992. And then followed by a second report in 1993. I've got them on my desk. They are, 2 inches thick each, and they have the framework of health identifiers, code sets, transactions, and the guardrails around data with privacy and security. So those two reports were taken by a physician, an MD, PhD, who was working at HHS, who was seconded by the Senate Finance Committee, and he wrote the law, and he happened to be a fellow Canadian of all people, Dr. William Braithwaite, who's known as Dr. HIPAA. And they were shopping around a bill, a healthcare bill that was moving through Congress. And there was a bill sponsored by a liberal senator from Massachusetts called Ted Kennedy and
Ah.
a conservative Republican from Kansas, Nancy Kassebaum, and it was sailing through. They tacked the administrative simplification component on the back end of the bill, and the rest is history. And WEDI was named in the law as an advisor to HHS, and of course, we've performed that role ever since.
Wow, that's great. That's a great history of WEDI. Thank you for that, Robert. Again, more stuff I didn't realize. I didn't realize this is where HIPAA came together. That's
Yeah.
outstanding. Wow. Let's talk a little bit about dive into the who. So the types of organizations, individuals that make up WEDI's membership. Talk to us about them.
Yeah, it's very broad. On the payers side, we have most of the large health plans, including folks like United Healthcare and Aetna, CVS. We've also got the major health plan associations, AHIP and the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. We've got the provider associations, the American Hospital Association, American Medical Association, Medical Group Management Association, American Dental Association, and then a number of the large providers. So folks like Kaiser Permanente and Mayo and Geisinger, Johns Hopkins. So folks like that. A lot of the key vendors in the EDI and interoperability space, like MCG and Edifex, folks like that. And then some of the smaller vendors like Itility Health, which is hyper focused on CMS 0057. We've got the clearinghouses, folks like Optum and Availity, PNC Bank, and folks like that. Then we've got a lot of supporting vendors as well, consulting firms and the like. And fairly recently, we've started to add in patient advocacy groups as well, because we've now, we always talk in healthcare about looking through the lens of a patient, but we so rarely do. So we're trying here at WEDI to add that voice to the conversation. And then two other groups, we have each of the major standards development organizations. So the HL7s, the X12, NCPDP, CAQH Core, all are members of WEDI. And then finally, and I think one of the reasons why WEDI is unique in the industry is we have CMS and ASTP on our board of directors, and we've also got state and other federal agencies, including OPM and VA, also are members of WEDI. So it's a very broad tent, and that is wonderful, but it can also, create some challenges trying to bring such diverse stakeholders together to solve problems.
And speaking of that, Robert, talk to us about what you do to bring those stakeholders together. The things like the work groups, like your industry events. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so we do a lot of our work through our work groups. We've got 17 work groups, sub-work groups, and task groups. Most of the HIPAA transactions have their own sub-work groups, so claims, claim status, eligibility, remittance, prior authorization, and a very important one, which I'm sure we'll get into, attachments, which the rule just dropped recently on that. But we also have a work group on genomics. We've got one on privacy and security. And we have a very important one. We have a task group focused on the No Surprises Act. And for that one, we focus strictly on the data exchange issues that providers and payers are seeing with trying to comply with that very challenging set of requirements.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, no, I know you do a lot with the work groups too, and we'll get into some of the specific stuff as well. Talk about the events though, Robert, before we
Sure.
move on to some of the other impacts WEDI's making. I know you have one coming up in the spring event. You have an annual event as well. Talk to us about those, bringing the industry together.
Sure. Yeah, we have four what we call anchor events. So a
Wow.
winter, spring, summer, and fall.
Mhm.
The We just finished up our winter event in beautiful San Diego. We'll have a virtual event in spring, second week in May. The summer forum is hybrid, so we'll have it in Chicago. It's a day and a half, very focused. We'll have one day on implementing the interoperability and prior auth final rule. And then the second day will focus on this new rule, the attachments rule that CMS just dropped. And then we got another hybrid event in the DC area in the fall. And then we have probably now, I think, about 30 or 40 events scattered throughout the year. We call them spotlights. They can be anything from 60 minutes to 3 hours, depending on the topic. And they're a chance to do deep dives into, for example, new rules that folks are trying to implement, new technologies like AI, of course, is a very hot issue right now. And then we've got two other types of events. One is called an MPA, a member position advisory event. So that is strictly for those that belong to the organization. When a proposed rule is released or the government puts out a request for information, we bring the membership together for a multi-hour discussion of the rule or the RFI, and then a discussion around what should WEDI say? What can we collectively and through a consensus-based approach, what can WEDI say to the government? So that's one thing. And then a brand new event that we just stood up called the Federal Policy Consultative or
Mhm.
Consultation Process, or FPC. That
Mhm.
is really where we're working with CMS, because many of your listeners may have heard of the National Committee for Vital and Health Statistics, NCVHS. They were charged with bringing the industry together to discuss, for example, an emerging standard to make recommendations to CMS whether or not they should move forward. For example, ICD-10 and ICD-11 and version 5010 of the HIPAA transactions. All of those were sort of run through the NCVHS first. Under the Trump administration, they shuttered the NCVHS and just recently reconstituted it, but not yet with sort of the same authority to hold hearings. So WEDI is trying to step into that void. We're having our FPC process. We kicked it off just yesterday, and we're having a survey. We're having an online submission form where folks can weigh in and give their comments. They don't have to be members of WEDI, so it's open to all. And then we're going to hold a live event on the 22nd of April. We'll have panels representing health plans, providers, clearinghouses, others, and then there'll be an open mic availability if somebody wants to make a comment. And again, the idea is to get good information for CMS to be able to decide the next steps for a policy. So we're very excited, and it's focused on the X12 version 008060 or 8060 as it's known, a brand new suite of updated HIPAA transactions. So everything from the claim, which everybody needs, to remittance and eligibility, claim status, all of the suite of HIPAA transactions potentially will be upgraded.
Well, that's great. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Talking the Walk on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm Tom Testa, and joining me today is Robert Tennant, the Executive Director of WEDI. Robert, I want to talk a bit about kind of WEDI in action. So you mentioned the attachments rule. CMS drops the attachment rule. Talk to us what that means. How does WEDI spring into action when that happens?
Yeah, so literally, it is 30 years in the making. The attachments was included in the original 96 law, and then because because HHS failed to act, it was actually included in Section 1104 of the Affordable Care Act. So they said, hey, HHS, you need to release this rule by 2016. Well, that date came and went. And it's ironic, it's the only HIPAA transaction that was ever piloted back in 2005, if you can believe it, with Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield up in New York, and Montefiore Health System in the Bronx. WEDI was a consultant during it, and it's one of those rare animals in healthcare where everybody won. There was tremendous cost savings on both sides. Unfortunately, it didn't move forward. And again, it's been 30 years, if you can believe it, from the 96 law. So we were thrilled to see the final rule. And what WEDI does, of course, is we're not the group that develops these standards. What we do is we come in behind, and once the standard has been named, then we work within our work groups and through our education to help the industry implement these standards. And so the claim attachment standard is much needed, but it's going to be a lot of work. And of course, it's in tandem with many other mandates that health plans and providers are wrestling with currently, including the interoperability and prior auth final rule, which is promoting a whole different set of standards for prior authorization than what we've seen in the past.
Well, that's a great overview of what happens kind of for those of us who aren't in the trenches with you folks to see kind of what happens when a law like that drops. Speaking of, you talked about the attachment law kind of being in play for almost 30 years now, but still a lot has changed. The industry has evolved. You mentioned AI earlier as one of the bigger players now today. Technology is impacting the landscape. During your time with the organization, how has WEDI adapted to this continuously evolving health IT landscape?
It's a great question because, originally we were very focused on EDI, on, making sure that the X12 transactions were moving smoothly. We worked on the identifier side with, for example, the National Provider Identifier. We helped the industry adopt ICD-10, the new diagnostic code set. But as you said, there's been some changes. And most importantly, I think the move towards application programming interfaces or APIs. And so we've been very active. We work very closely with the Da Vinci folks. And our niche in the industry is very simple. Once these standards are developed by, for example, Da Vinci, They're adopted by CMS like they were in the 0057 law. The question is, what next? How do you make theory apply to the real world of healthcare? And so that's really our a chance to come in. Again, we're not developing the standards, but we're bringing the industry together to talk about the business impact of these standards and how to address some of these business challenges that are surrounding these APIs, because the theory is one thing, but how will they work when it's health plans and providers trying to exchange data in real time? So by bringing the experts together, and we have been very lucky in our education that we bring in some of the top folks from Da Vinci, but also from some of the key stakeholders that are implementing these already. And so we learn from them, and really it's a chance to ask questions and pose hypotheticals. And I think in particular with the interoperability and prior auth rule, the fact that CMS recommended and didn't require the use of the implementation guides have raised a lot of questions of how everything is going to work. And so one of the things that we have been promoting, not just with this rule, but throughout our history, is the idea of testing. That really, it's not good enough to build it and then go live. You need to be testing with your trading partners. So we've actually created a testing a platform at WEDI.org where folks, whether they be payers, providers, supporting vendors, can come in and list their status report. So they may say, we're ready, or we will be ready to test with coverage requirements, discovery, CRD by this date. We're trying to act almost like a matchmaker. So if a payer is ready, but they don't seem to have any of their provider partners ready, folks can see that this plan is ready and link arms. And we think the only way that this is going to be a successful transition to these APIs is if we do a lot of testing ahead of time and not scramble at the last minute trying to meet that 1127 compliance date.
So it sounds like too, not only, something like that example you just gave of what you have on wedi.org, but that's also a way of helping meet the kind of the changing needs and interests of your members as well, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, because they are challenged with trying to just meet the day-to-day needs of their organization, whether they be a health plan, a provider, or a vendor. And what we can do, hopefully, is give a platform for them to come in and learn from their peers. And so maybe not reinvent the wheel every time, but if a plan has already gone down a particular route, it's helpful for others to hear and learn and ask questions about their route as well.
Robert, we talked about the technologies and impacting over the years the industry and how WEDI's help. How about on the advocacy side? Over the history of WEDI, and there's been not only new technologies but new administrations, right? So how has things changed or evolved, and what you're doing on the advocacy side?
One of the nice things about health IT is that despite a change in administration from, for example, Democrat to Republican, health IT seems to be on a fairly straight course forward. There's obviously some differences of opinions here and there, but unlike other areas of healthcare, for example, the national coordinators have been pretty uniform in their vision of what needs to happen in U.S. healthcare. And so that's been a little bit easier for us. So we don't have to battle what I'd say politics, that we can focus on what is best for the industry, what is best for patients. So our goal is, again, we're not a lobbying organization. So our goal is to educate. So the fact that when we speak, for example, when we submit a comment letter, we do not have a 51-49 rule. So if 51% of our membership says yes, 49 says no, we're not going to take a stand on that. We only take a stand on areas that we can come to consensus on. So, for example, if we come out with a comment letter on interoperability or prior auth, it's with the sense that this is a collective agreement from these very wide-ranging set of stakeholders. And I think that is helpful for the administration to hear, okay, the plans, the providers, the vendors, they're agreeing on these set of issues. And that, I think, makes our voice stronger. And again, our goal is really to help the administration, help HHS and its agencies really understand perhaps the impact that a proposed regulation might have on the industry.
Robert, this has been a great conversation. I have one more question for you before we wrap things up. And I know anyone listening to this interview knows the answer, but in your own words, why join WEDI?
Well, I tell you, I've been involved for my whole career, and it's not just the education and the work groups, it's the camaraderie that I've found with my peers. It's a wonderful and unique way to come together. You make connections. If you're a provider, you make connections with payers, and payers with providers, and vendors, and standards groups, and feds. So you get to know these folks on a personal level, and it just makes things so much easier. And it's nice, we're an organization, frankly, that does not just complain about things. There's plenty of those in healthcare. We try to solve problems. So we're not a meeting ground for folks to just sort of complain about their lot in life. We're here to identify the problem and solve them. And that makes us, I think, pretty unique in health IT.
Well, Robert, it's really been great having you on the show. I appreciate the time and these great insights about WEDI and the industry today.
No, thank you, Tom, for the opportunity.
If you'd like more information on WEDI, visit their website at WEDI, that's WEDI.org. You can also connect with Robert on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on Talking the Walk. Tune in to hear us weekdays at 8:30 a.m., 4:30 p.m., and 12:30 a.m. Eastern Time. You can also find all of our episodes on the Talking the Walk program page on healthcarenowradio.com. If you're walking the talk, we want to talk to you. Connect with me on LinkedIn or by filling out the show's contact form on healthcarenowradio.com. Until next time, keep walking your talk. I'm Tom Testa. Take care, everyone.